Interested in learning about wine, but not sure where to start? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. I'm your host, Haley Bowman, and I'm so glad you're here. I'm a wine enthusiast turned wine educator and founder of the Seattle-based wine tasting business, Cork and Fizz. It is my goal to build your confidence in wine by making it approachable and lots of fun. You can expect to learn everything from how to describe your favorite wine to what to pair with dinner tonight, and so much more. Whether you're a casual wine sipper or a total cork dork like myself, this podcast is for you. So grab yourself a glass and let's dive in. Welcome back to the Cork and Fizz Guide to Wine podcast. If you're new here, welcome. So glad to have you. And for those of you who've been listening for a while, thank you so much. I know I say it every time, but it really does mean so much to me. Today's episode, we are going to be learning about the difference between organic, biodynamic, natural, and clean wine. Plus, I've thrown in a little bonus one. We're also going to talk about sustainability and what that means when you have a wine that is made sustainably. I feel like a lot of people, like, these words get used a lot. Some of them are honestly more marketing than anything. And it's hard to know, like, what does it mean when you're drinking a biodynamic wine versus an organic wine? How are you to know? So we're going to kind of do a brief overview of all of these terms just to kind of give you an idea of what the difference is and what to look out for. Every one of these could have their own episode, so I'm not going to deep dive. We're not going to go super deep into any of these. If you would like me to do that, please let me know. I'd be more than happy to do a specific episode just on biodynamic wine, right? And like diving into every aspect of it, explaining more of it. More than happy to do that. Just let me know. Send me an email, haley@corkandfizz.com, or I think in the show notes, you can also text me. I have my number there. That is me that gets those texts, and I will make sure to do that. So I'm also going to be sharing a few of my opinions, of course, right? Got to share those in with each of these. So we are going to start with the term organic. So organic wine. Now, this term gets a little muddled because the thing is the US and the EU, so anywhere in Europe, have different standards for what is classified as organic. So starting with US, so wines made in the US. Just like any USDA organic product, organic wine has to be made without using prohibited substances or genetic engineering. Now, one of these is like genetically modified yeast, so GMO yeast. You cannot use those. You can use organic yeast in order to make the wine. It doesn't have to be just the yeast that exists naturally on the grapes to start that fermentation. That was a question I had about organic wine. I'm like, does that mean that we can't add? But you can. That yeast just has to be organic. When you're thinking about non-organic on the other side, right? Like if we were to classify organic versus non-organic wines use herbicides or fungicides in the vineyards. And they may also use additives in the wine. Like if you've ever heard of mega purple, it's the substance that is added to wine to add color to the wine. The thing is, most chemicals are used in the vineyard. So that's kind of going to be your main differentiator. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, why I'm calling that out. And then, of course, as a USDA organic product, it has to undergo the same rigorous requirements of USDA organic certification. And we'll talk about that in a second, too. Now, in the US, you cannot have any added sulfites in your winemaking. These are those things that a lot of people try to claim give them headaches. Most people, it does not. And honestly, it's really a preservative that dates back to the Roman times. And in most cases is not a health concern. We do have to have it on labels. You'll see on wine, it says contains sulfites. Organic wines will also say that because sulfites are actually naturally made during the winemaking process. They just can't add any more in for stabilization. The reason we have to put it on the bottle is some people are allergic to the sulfites. So it's just for their sake, but it's a very, very small percentage. And you also wouldn't be able to have a lot of other things if you couldn't have sulfites in wine. And so because of not being able to add any sulfites for that stabilization, this is why you'll often see US wines that say made with organic grapes. This is a different level of certification than just a full organic wine. So if you see the full USDA organic on the wine, it means it's gone through all of the USDA regulations and they haven't added any sulfites. If you see made with organic grapes, This means that their grapes were farmed organically. They also have certain restrictions on how much sulfites can be added in and a few other things. But again, remember how most of the chemicals used in non-organic wines are in the vineyard? So if you can find a wine that is made with organic grapes, you're like 99% of the way there. So I think that's something to look out for on US bottles is either the organic USDA or it's saying made with organic grapes. Just a quick reminder, if you are not on my mailing list yet, what are you waiting for? I would love for you to join. When you do, you'll get a free shopping guide that has 15 of my favorite wines under $15. Head to corkandfizz.com, scroll down to the bottom, and there'll be a little section where you can join the mailing list. I send out a weekly newsletter filled with wine tips, recommendations, special offers, and so much more. Now, let's get back to the show. Now, in the EU, remember we said the US and the EU were different for organic. In the EU and also in Canada as well, they have similar rules about having to be certified organic, not using herbicides or fungicides in the vineyard, but they do allow small amounts of sulfites to be added. These numbers probably don't mean anything to you, but in case you're curious, in the EU, dry red wines can have up to 100 parts per million of sulfites added. Dry whites can have 150, so a little bit more. And then any others, it's just 30 ppm, so parts per million, less than the conventional, so non-organic. Now, note, it also costs a lot to get certified, and it is a long process. So many smaller wineries may be farming organically and probably making their wines very close to organically, but they don't have the certification. Also, many farmers have small plots of land that they farm, right? They only have, like 20 to 100, rows of vineyards. And then they're right up next another farmer who's farming their vineyards, right? To be certified organic, everyone around them would also have to be certified organic because, if your soil is organic, but the one that's like an inch to the side of you is not, that can interfere with your organic certification. So it makes it nearly impossible in that case. Also, I've heard stories with just how strict things are. So one winery lost their organic certification because they brought in recycled posts for the vineyard, which is a very sustainable thing, right? You'd think that's very positive. Let's not, let's recycle, reuse. But the posts had remnants of chemicals and pesticides on them. So when they were put in the soil, it interfered with the soil. And so they no longer met the regulations for organic. So it's really hard. So keep in mind, like, this is one of those things where it's great if you see it on the bottle, that's awesome, but also don't assume if a wine doesn't have organic certification or made with organic grapes written on the bottle that it's not made very organically. This is where I highly recommend asking questions. But that is organic. So essentially, the idea is no using prohibited substances, no using the chemicals in the vineyard or when making your wine, no adding any additional additives or genetic engineering to make your wine. That is organic. It's just like any organic food. Now, the next term is biodynamic. So this refers to the method in which the grapes are grown and harvested. It's similar to organic, but it goes beyond just the grapes. So biodynamic was inspired, and actually it's biodynamic farming. It applies beyond just wine and grapes. So biodynamic farming is inspired by the writings of Rudolf Steiner, though I don't think we like this guy. I think he had a lot of issues. So like, great for the biodynamics, not great as a person. But his approach to grape production, and it requires this really intense attention and intention to the details of running a vineyard. And actually, biodynamic farming predates organic farming by 20 years. So like I said, it shares many traits with organic, but it also brings in astrology and cycles of the moon into play. I've once heard it called an energy management system. And the goal is to balance the energy between vine, man, earth, and the stars. And I know this sounds a little crazy. We'll talk about that in a second. But the idea is the entire vineyard and the winery is a single organism. So in terms of the basic concepts, just to kind of give you an idea here instead of just like generalization, the various tasks for farming a vineyard are regulated by a biodynamic calendar. And in this calendar, the days are separated into 4 different types of days. You have fruit days. Those are days that are best days for harvesting grapes. Then you have root days. These are days that are ideal for pruning. Flower days are ideal for the vineyard, just leaving the vineyard alone, let it do its thing. And leaf days are ideal days for watering the plants. And what's interesting is these days actually line up with like the four elements. So, for example, leaf days is considered like a water day, right? So you'd never want to prune on those days because those plants, the idea is that they are craving water in that moment. So your best thing is to water them. Keeping in mind, so for biodynamic farming, there are also no chemicals or manufactured additions, so no commercial yeast in this case, are allowed in biodynamic wine. Now, beyond this is where it starts to get a little weird. So, because you're not allowed to use pesticides or anything like that, there are other ways to try to protect your vineyards and then also give back to the soil. And so, one of the things that they do, this is what biodynamic wine is famous for, but they have cow horns. They stuff them with a special compost preparation and they bury them for a certain amount of time. Then those cow horns are unearthed and the contents are used to make a tea. I'm saying tea in quotes. They basically just soak it in some water to create a solution that is then used to fertilize the vineyard. I know this sounds crazy, but it actually has been proven to work really well. And I'll tell you a little story at the end here about that. But biodynamic wines, they do have to be certified to officially be called a biodynamic wine. In the US, you have and I think this goes beyond the US as well, but it's the Demeter, Demeter. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but it is international. So yeah, it goes beyond the US, but I guess I was familiar with it here. The Demeter International, this provides a resource for the Demeter biodynamic wines, and that is how you can be certified. There's also Biodivin, 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 maybe? I don't know. Certifies only 100 European wineries. Though I will say that you do hear, they may not be certified, but I've heard a lot of wineries say, like, we use biodynamic practices. And that might mean that they're doing some of the biodynamic farming style, but not all of it. Now, before we stop talking about biodynamic, I do have to point out that some people see it as a bit of a pseudoscience. However, here's the thing, right? They're like astrology, weird water, moon days. What are we talking about? But it is a fact. Biodynamic soils have actually been tested against non-organic soils. So not organic versus biodynamic, but biodynamic versus non-organic. And they showed greater disease suppression, a decrease in compaction, and added organic materials. So does actually help. Also, I was visiting a winery. So the story I was going to tell you was I was visiting a winery down in Santa Barbara. And while we were there, they told us about this one vineyard they had. I think it was up on a hill somewhere near them. And they never got good grapes from it. They were ready to give up. They were like, this is just not a place meant to grow grapes. And I think one of them must have like listened to something about biodynamics or must have read about it. And they're like, let's just give it one more try. Let's try farming biodynamically and see what happens. This podcast is sponsored by Repour Wine Savers. Listen, I love wine, but that doesn't mean I want to drink a full bottle every night. You see, it's always a risk opening a bottle knowing I'll only have a glass or two. But now I don't worry about that at all because I have Repour. These little contraptions will keep your open bottles of wine good for up to 3 months by removing oxygen from the bottle using fancy chemistry. And they're so easy to use. I simply open a bottle of wine, cork or screw cap, just like normal, and enjoy my glass or two. Then, when I'm ready to call it a night, I rip the foil off my Repour wine saver and place it in the bottle in place of the cork or screw cap, and then stick the bottle in the fridge. Simple as that. Then, whenever I grab another glass from that bottle in the future, I just make sure to put the Repour back on as soon as I'm done pouring. It's that easy. Want to give Repour a try? Head to repour.com, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ for 10% off your order. That's Repour, repour.com, and use code CORKANDFIZZ. No spaces in that, and the and is spelt out. So it's CORKANDFIZZ. Once you have Repour, you'll never have to worry about opening a bottle of wine just for one glass. I mean, heck, now you can try 2 or more wines at the same time and have your own at-home wine tasting. This podcast is sponsored by the Cork Crew Virtual Wine Club. Interested in trying new wines, but not sure where to start? Or maybe you've been listening to this podcast for a while and you love the idea of tasting wine live with me. If that's you, come join my Court Crew virtual wine club, and you'll get to sip wine with me twice a month while I help you find new favorite wines. The Court Crew is not your ordinary wine club. This is a community of people who are passionate about exploring new flavors, learning about different wine styles, and having fun along the way. And the best part about this club, purchasing the wine is completely optional. Plus, all events are recorded, and you have access to the full library of recordings as a Court Crew member. So you can always catch up if you can't make it live. Oh, and did I mention it's virtual, which means you get to do all of this from the comfort of your sofa in your PJs. No need to worry about driving in crappy traffic, finding a designated driver, or spending an arm and a leg on a taxi. Want to give it a try without the commitment? You're in luck. Right now, I'm offering a free class pass to anybody who wants to try out the Court Crew Virtual Wine Tasting Club. With this pass, you'll be able to join a Court Crew event of your choosing. No strings attached. I don't need your credit card. I don't need you to sign up for anything. You'll be my guest. Simply head to corkandfizz.com/free class pass to get your class pass and be one step closer to becoming a member of the best wine tasting club around, the Court Crew. I can't wait to see you there. Now let's get back to the show. And kid you not, this vineyard turned right around and started producing some of their best grapes. So it's one of those where you're like, sounds kind of funky, but they have the proof that this stuff actually works. I believe that winery was Beckman Vineyard. So if you ever try a Beckman wine or if you get a chance to taste there, ask them about the biodynamic farming that they do. Okay, so organic, no prohibited substances, no additives, no herbicides, fungicides. Biodynamic, similar, no additives, no chemicals in the vineyard. However, you're also going to have that idea of like the vineyard is one organism. You want everything to work together, and you have that biodynamic calendar that has to do with the moon, cycles of the moon, and astrology. Okay. Okay, now we have natural wine. So this is the least regulated of all the terms. No one really determines this but the winemaker, but I think they're working on this. So the idea of natural wine is it's typically used to describe wines that have nothing added or subtracted during the winemaking process. So they're not going to add any additives. They're also not going to filter the wine and take anything out of it. And they're also not going to want to add any oak characteristics from barrels. So it might be in barrel, but it's going to be in old barrels. They don't want to get anything they don't want to add anything to it. Now, to me, the qualities of these wines are hit or miss. And that's not to say that like natural wine doesn't have a future. I think it's more about like what natural wine means right now. Like some are great and some are, well, weird. So it's actually really interesting. Just this week, I went so there's a local wine bar near me that is all natural wine, and I love them. If you're in the Seattle area, it's called Mora, Mora. It was actually founded by the owner of Molly's Bottle Shop, which if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, I had an episode with Molly back. It was episode 22. And Molly is a real not pioneer, well, maybe pioneer, but like she's a real proponent of natural wine, and she knows a lot about it, and she's really informative. It's really great. I highly recommend listening to that episode if you want to learn more about natural wine. Anyway, went to her wine bar and went with a friend who is learning about wine, and she had asked, when we were there trying the natural wine, and she asked the person who was pouring, whenever I have natural wine, I feel like they all have a certain taste to them. They all taste the same. Is that crazy? Am I crazy? And both the person pouring and me were like, no, I think you're onto something. There is something about natural wine, and especially like the popular natural wines now. Now, they don't all like always taste the same, but the things that we kind of pulled out, they tend to be a little more acidic. And they tend to not have that, like, they're not like super smooth. And I don't want that to sound like a bad thing. Like, I feel like they have like character to them, right? Like, it's a difference between like a perfectly like airbrushed face, when you like airbrush and like even like edited on the computer versus like everybody has little blemishes, and that's totally fine. That just looks like your natural face. I think that's the difference between like natural and non-natural. Like natural wines, they have not smoothed it down. They have not filtered it. They're just like, this is the wine. Yeah, it's gonna have a little bump here. It's gonna have a little thing here. Like that's okay. Versus like non-natural, the idea is to make it like very smooth, similar to like soda or something else that you would drink. I will say the biggest downside I think about natural is some wineries use natural to cover up flaws. So they're like, we made this naturally. And it is hard to make a good wine naturally sometimes, especially depends on like where you're growing the grapes and climate and all those things. But if there's something truly wrong with the wine, if it has an abundance of volatile acidity, or it didn't stay stable in the bottle after you bottled it, and now I'm trying to think of like some other things that, if it oxygenized or all these different things, right? Oxidated, if it's oxidated, so a little is good, a lot is bad, right? If it has some Brett to it, if it smells like sweaty leather saddle, a little is good, a lot is bad. You can't just call it natural and be like, that's what it's supposed to be, like natural wine doesn't always, it's not just going to cover up a bad wine. But on the flip side here, there are plenty of wines that I love, and I never knew they were natural. I didn't know it until they showed up in Molly's bottle shop, and she's like, yeah, these wines from, one of them I'm thinking of in particular, is from the Loire Valley in France, both red and whites. And I've had their wines many times. I'm like, well, they're natural? I'm like, yeah, they make their wine naturally. So it doesn't always mean those like kombucha style wines. There are plenty of different styles of natural wine. So just to give you the general like trends for natural wine, like what do most people follow? I would say it's handpicking grapes from either biodynamic, sustainable, or organic farms, free from herbicides and pesticides. They use only the native yeast that exists in the air and on the grape skins for fermentation. So they're not going to add any yeast, even one that like they created themselves, like think like a sourdough starter. Like they're not going to do that. They're just going to let the fermentation that exists do its thing. And then they're going to follow a nothing added, nothing removed kind of method where traditional additives like sulfites are not added to the wine during or after the fermentation process. And again, since anybody can put the word natural on their wine label, I encourage you to do research and ask when you are buying the wine, what does this mean to you? You call this a natural wine. What does that mean? There is a movement in Europe for a natural wine certification process, and Molly actually talked about that in that episode that I had with her. So if you want to learn more about natural wine, go back to episode 22 and check that out. Okay, we're going to take a very, very, very short amount of time to talk about a word that I don't like in the wine world that is kind of related to all these, and that is the word clean. I cringe when I say it. I don't know, maybe I'm being like overly harsh, but my judgment, I don't like it. I don't think clean tells you anything. And I think it's primarily used as a marketing tactic. I think a lot of times calling something a clean wine makes it sound like it's healthy for you. It is not clean. It's alcohol, and alcohol is a toxin. It also implies that other wines are like dirty or unclean. And I also feel like it tends to kind of fall under the same category as things like sugar-free, low-calorie, fit. All these things are trying to make it sound like this wine is healthy or better for you. And here's the thing, with sugar-free wine, most wines are already sugar-free. If you get a dry wine, that is literally the definition of dry, is no sugar left over. Like the yeast ate up all the sugar and created alcohol and carbon dioxide. Now, in terms of low calorie, alcohol is what contains calories. And so just based on the alcohol percentage, that is what's going to determine your calorie count. So you don't need a low calorie, just look for a low alcohol wine. Like simple. So anyway, I don't love clean. That's my little got on my soapbox. I'm going to get down now. But I think there are better words. And like I said, like organic and biodynamic are both like they have certifications for them. Natural doesn't yet, but I appreciate the conversation that it's starting. And they're not trying to say that they're healthy. They're simply trying to say that it's like the natural way of making wine. We're not adding anything. We're not taking anything away. We're just letting it do its thing. But I don't know. Maybe take what you will. I don't love the word clean. Okay, little bonus here before we finish off the episode. I just wanted to hit on the term sustainable because I think this has been popping up more and more with respect to wine. So the idea of sustainable is essentially this mitigation and reduction of wastefulness in winemaking. Now, sustainability depends on the region that the wine, or the grapes, I should say, are grown. That region's unique environmental stresses and challenges, those are the things that affect what the sustainability needs to be. And so there isn't just one single sustainability certification program. I think sustainability really also hones in on the idea that climate change is happening. I guarantee you no person making wine would deny climate change because they're like, hell yeah, it's made a big impact on how we're making wine. And so this idea of sustainability is to be able to continue making wine in the future and not use up all of our resources that we have to make wine now. Also, many sustainability programs incorporate social equity into their certification. And I think this is so important. And what this kind of means is that they are taking care of the people who pick the grapes and who make the wine. A lot of times, those people who are picking the grapes are only hired in for that time when they are picking grapes. And then during the other times, they are not employed at the winery. And this works for some people, but not a lot. And, I think sustainability in this case is to make sure that those people are taken care of. They have housing, they have food throughout the entire year, and finding other ways to incorporate them into the winemaking process. So just to kind of give you an idea, some of the things that the sustainable wine programs care about include crop biodiversity, irrigation standards or water management, business management, human resource management, there's that human piece, soil management, pest management, which often prohibiting most pesticides because those pesticides, once they're in the soil, it's really hard to get them out, energy use, and a lot more. You also may hear the 3 E's of sustainability. These are economic viability, environmental stewardship, and social equity. So in full honesty, I am more drawn to sustainability, the sustainability movements, and if a wine is made sustainably. I'm also leaning into the natural wine movement. I think Molly is to blame for that, but I think she'd be happy to hear that. And I'm very curious about it. But that also doesn't mean that I never buy wines that aren't any of these 4 things. And a lot of times, what I'll recommend to you is just pay attention to where your wine is made, how it's made, and who makes it, and ask questions about it. Like shop small, go to your small wine shops. And when you're buying a bottle, ask them, what do they know about the winemaking practices there? Like, do they do organic or biodynamic or sustainable? Are they working towards it? Because it does take time to fully get there. Visit the wineries themselves, right? That is the best way to learn about these things. Ask questions. And, that is, in my opinion, that's your best bet for growing green. And really, if you care about these things, that's how you can do that. All right. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you know another wine lover in your life that would enjoy, please share it with them. Find your favorite episode, or just share this episode if you love this, and send it their way, or take a screenshot right now and post it to your social media tag at Cork and Fizz. I would so appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I release new episodes every Wednesday. Now, in next week's episode, we are going to be diving into another lesser known wine region. I feel like you all really loved the podcast episode I did on Ukrainian wine. So next week, we are going to talk about Lebanese wine, which is very similar, where they have a history of making wine, but aren't quite as well known for it now. The country has been really affected by war in the past, and I think it's going to be a really good episode to learn about all that. So thanks again for listening. If you want to learn more about wine, come follow me at Cork and Fizz on Instagram. And if you're interested in exploring new wines, learning more about the wine world and the sustainable wine movement, consider joining my community of wine lovers, the virtual tasting club, the Cork Crew. We actually recently, a couple months ago, had somebody come in who's a sustainable wine expert and talk to us about what that means and what they look for. So if you want to come check it out, you can actually come to your first tasting for free. Just go to corkandfizz.com/free class pass, and you'll get a free pass, and you'll get to pick out the next event that you want to come try out and see what it's like. Cheers!